Soviet invasion of Afghanistan, 1979, Christmas night. 1979. Soviet tanks cross into Afghanistan while helicopters sweep over the mountain passes. Most people notice the headlines. Few notice the quieter truth behind them, the earlier chain of choices that made this invasion feel necessary in Moscow. Afghanistan did not become a crisis overnight. Long before Soviet armor reached the border, this country already sat in a risky place on the map and an even riskier place in history. Traitors, armies, and empires had passed through for centuries, and many of them learned the same lesson the hard way. Afghanistan could be visited, bargained with, and even influenced, yet it resisted being controlled for long. Geography shaped much of that resistance. High mountains cut towns from each other. Valleys often felt like separate worlds. Travel could mean a broken road, a narrow pass, or days on foot. Power rarely moved in a straight line from the capital to the edges of the country. Local ties carried more weight than distant orders. Tribal leaders, village elders, and religious figures held authority that no decree from Kabul could erase. After World War II, the country entered a calmer period under King Zahir Shah. His rule did not erase hardship or tension, yet it kept the state from coming apart. He chose slow reform instead of sudden change. Schools expanded in the cities, roads and small projects appeared across the country. Kabul changed faster than most rural districts. Girls attended school in growing numbers. New ideas entered public life, though every step forward came with caution. That careful pace created strain of its own. Some Afghans wanted faster change and less restraint. Others feared that even modest reforms would damage religion, family order, and custom. Those fears did not exist only in theory. In many villages, daily life still followed old patterns, and pressure from the capital often felt like an insult rather than help. These arguments soon moved into classrooms and lecture halls. Kabul's universities became gathering places for young men and women who believed the future should look different. Students debated monarchy, reform, Islam, and socialism. Political circles formed and hardened into factions. Afghan communists, small in number yet determined, built networks among educated city groups and a thin layer of officers trained abroad. At the same time, Islamist thinkers organized their own movements, often arguing that the country needed renewal without surrendering its faith. This deeper divide explains more than most headlines ever did. Afghanistan already carried a split between city and countryside, between new ideas and older traditions, between central authority and local power. The Cold War did not create these tensions. It stepped into them, recognized an opening, and began to shape what followed. That outside influence soon became impossible to ignore. Two rival powers arrived with money, roads, weapons, and advice. Each expected loyalty in return. Each believed influence could be bought. Years later, one man would turn that fragile balance into a final crisis. Amin did not wait long to remove his own teacher. Taraki had been the face of the revolution, the man Moscow trusted, the leader who spoke of discipline and loyalty. Amin had served beside him, learned from him, and then turned on him in silence. Guards entered the room, a pillow pressed down. The old leader died in his own palace and Amin took his place. News of the killing reached Moscow within days, and concern turned into alarm. Amin ruled with a heavy hand and little patience. Prison cells filled faster than before. Executions continued. Villages rose against him across wide areas of the countryside. Reports arrived that he had once studied in the United States. Some whispered that he admired Western ideas. Others went further and claimed he might one day cut ties with Moscow if it suited him. Proof mattered less than suspicion. Trust collapsed quickly. Soviet leaders now saw Amin as unstable and dangerous, not only to Afghanistan, but to their own position in the region. Rebel forces controlled large stretches of land. Army units deserted in growing numbers. Government authority shrank until it held only major cities and a few roads that linked them. As control faded, Soviet involvement quietly increased. More advisors arrived. Small groups of troops appeared at airfields and bases under the guise of protection. Equipment crossed the border without announcement. Officers inspected Afghan units that no longer followed orders. Inside the Kremlin, meetings grew longer. Voices rose. Maps covered tables. December arrived with no sign of relief. Secret sessions filled the Politburo calendar. Reports spoke of betrayal, collapse, and the danger of losing everything Moscow had built in Afghanistan. The meeting on December 12th ended the argument. A short decision replaced months of debate. Amin would be removed. A new leader would take power. Soviet troops would cross the border to secure the situation. Several generals warned against it. The Muslim world would turn hostile. Talks with the West would suffer damage. The army would face a land known for defeating outsiders. Those warnings failed to change the outcome. Leaders feared Washington might gain a foothold near the Soviet frontier. Leaders feared the loss of decades of money, roads, bases, and influence. Leaders remembered earlier interventions that had worked with little cost. Hungary had returned to order. Czechoslovakia had been subdued. Angola and Ethiopia had welcomed Soviet support. Confidence carried the vote. The mission would stay short. The force would remain limited. Afghan troops would fight most battles. Soviet units would steady the state, place the leader, and withdraw. Orders left Moscow within days. Christmas arrived quietly along the border. On December 25th, the first Soviet columns crossed into Afghanistan. Tanks rolled through dust and snow. Trucks followed with fuel and ammunition. Helicopters lifted from their bases and swept over the high passes of the Hindu Kush. The public plan looked simple: secure the main cities, hold the roads, guard airports and ministries, show strength, let Afghan forces face the rebels. Another plan moved beneath the surface. Special units had trained in silence for weeks. Soldiers from Central Asia wore Afghan uniforms and spoke local languages. Intelligence teams memorized every hallway and guard post inside the presidential palace. The true target was Amin himself. Kabul slept while the trap closed. Amin believed help had arrived. Soviet officers still visited his palace. Phone calls offered reassurance. One drink at dinner carried poison, yet the dose failed. He fell ill, but survived. Gunfire soon spread across the city. Power lines fell. Radios went silent. Paratroopers seized ministries and police stations. Armored vehicles raced through empty streets. At the Taj Beg Palace, explosions shattered the gates. Grenades burst inside stairwells. Smoke filled the halls. Bodyguards fought until bullets ran out. Amin and his sons died before the hour ended. 43 minutes erased a government. The next day, Babrak Karmal landed by plane and announced a new beginning. Few believed him. Word traveled fast. A foreign army had entered the capital and chosen Afghanistan's ruler by force. Families fled almost at once. Camps rose across the border in Pakistan. Lines of refugees stretched across dusty roads. The world answered with anger and fear. The United Nations condemned the invasion. Western leaders spoke of broken trust. President Jimmy Carter warned that Soviet power now threatened peace far beyond Central Asia. Help for the rebels grew without delay. Pakistan opened training camps. Saudi funds paid for weapons. American aid moved through hidden channels. Intelligence officers spoke openly of turning Afghanistan into a graveyard for Soviet power. Islamabad became a frontline city. Nuclear concerns faded from polite debate. Alliances shifted in silence. Moscow had expected an order. Moscow found war. Soviet leaders believed a friendly government would calm the country. They believed cities could be held with armor and aircraft. They believed resistance would fade once faced with modern force. Reality followed a different path. Fighters disappeared into valleys and caves. Attacks came at night and from hillsides. Foreign weapons reached the mountains. Casualties climbed. Letters returned home were edged in black. Morale sank. 6 months became years. A short mission became a decade. The cost spread far beyond Afghanistan. The Soviet economy bent under the strain. Young men returned wounded or did not return at all. A generation learned war as a trade. New networks formed that later shaped conflicts far from these valleys. Closing statement history now draws a long line from those first tanks to later disasters, including the attacks of September 11th and another invasion 20 years later. This war never began as a search for land. It began with fear, pride, and the belief that control could be restored through force. One secret meeting reshaped a nation and weakened an empire. That is how a quiet Christmas decision turned Afghanistan into the Cold War's deadliest battlefield. If this story held your attention, stay with us.